Grammar Lesson 6.3 Regular Pattern Verbs in the Preterite Tense. When you're describing the past in Spanish, there are two separate tenses that we use. The first is called the preterite tense. This is used to describe an action that was completed in the past. It was a one-time thing, it's over and it's done with. The other tense we use is the imperfect tense. This is used to describe actions that maybe weren't completely finished or completed, something that might have been ongoing, or we can also use the imperfect tense to describe how things used to be. Today our focus is going to be on the preterite tense and how to conjugate verbs in this tense. As you know, there are three different types of verb endings. We have AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. When you're conjugating in the preterite tense, your AR verb endings are E for the yo form, haste for the tu form, O for the él, ella, usted form, amos for the nosotros form, hastes for the vosotros form, and aron for the ellos, ellas, ustedes form. Here's an example of how you would use those verb endings with the verb comprar, to buy. Yo compré, I bought. Tú compraste, you bought. Él compró, ella compró, or usted compró. He bought, she bought, you bought. In the plural forms, we have nosotros compramos, we bought. Vosotros comprasteis, you bought, when you're talking about you and it's a group of people, and especially if you're talking about people in Spain. Ellos compraron, ellas compraron, or ustedes compraron. So they bought or you bought when you're talking to a group of people. So that's the one that's kind of like saying you guys bought. The ER and IR verbs are going to have the same endings. So you'll notice for the yo form, we use I with an accent. For the tu form, we use iste. For the él, ella, usted form, we use yo, so I and then O with an accent. The nosotros form is imos. The vosotros form is going to end with istes. And the ellos, ellas, ustedes ending is ieron. Here are some examples of verbs that you would use these endings with. So if I wanted to say I sell, it would, or not, I'm sorry, not I sell, I sold, because this happened in the past tense. Yo vendí, tú vendiste, él, ella, or usted vendió, nosotros vendimos, vosotros vendisteis, ellos, ellas, or ustedes vendieron. And then the IR verb, you can see how those would be used with the verb describir, to describe. I want to point out a couple of common patterns that you'll find in the preterite tense. First of all, if you look at the first person singular form as well as the third person singular form, you'll notice that all of these verb endings have an accent. The accent's really important in the preterite tense because if you leave that accent off, a lot of times those words can have a completely different meaning. For example, if you look at the third person singular form of the verb comprar, for to buy, so if I wanted to say she bought, I would say ella compró, and there's an accent on the O. It's very important that you have that accent because if you don't and you just say compró, that could mean I buy in the present tense. So keep that in mind that you have to have those accents when you're using the preterite tense. Also, if you look at the nosotros forms of AR verbs and IR verbs, you'll notice that the preterite tense form looks exactly the same as the present tense form. So when you are, whenever you encounter one of these words in the nosotros form, you have to kind of read around that word, look at the context clues and the vocabulary and things like that, the other words in the sentence to make sure you understand whether it's present tense or preterite tense. The ER verb ending is a little bit easier because it ends in IMOS versus the present tense ending, which would be EMOS. When you're conjugating in the yo form in the preterite tense, there are a couple of spelling changes that occur every once in a while. They're not that common, but they're important to know. If you have a verb that ends in CAR, you're going to change the C to a QU before the E. So an example would be the verb buscar. If I want to say I searched, I would say yo busqué. And the reason that we change the C to a QU is so that it maintains the hard C sound, that K sound. If we didn't change it to a QU and it was B-U-S-C-E with an accent, then that verb would become bousser, which is not the word that we're wanting to say. You're also going to change a G to a GU before an E, and that's for the same reason. So it maintains the hard G sound instead of the soft G sound. An example would be in the verb llegar. To say I arrived, you would say yo llegué. If you didn't put that U in there with the G, then it would become yo llegué, which is not at all the word you're wanting to say. Lastly, if you have a Z, like a ZAR verb, you are going to change the Z to a C before the E. An example would be empezar. If I want to say I started, I would say yo empecé with a C right before the accented E. Okay, stem changing verbs can be a little bit complicated in the preterite tense, so make sure you get all of this information in your notes before completing your assignment. The first thing you need to know is that AR and ER verbs do not stem change in the preterite tense. They never do in the preterite tense. Here's an example of a couple of verbs that would stem change in the present tense, but don't in the preterite. So the verb cerrar, you're used to seeing that as an E to IE verb, and volver, you're used to seeing that as an O to UE verb. But if you look at their conjugations here, you'll see they don't stem change at all in the preterite tense. So that's hopefully a little bit easier for you to remember that. Okay, when we're talking about IR verbs, they do stem change in the preterite tense, but they're only going to stem change in the third person forms. So in the singular forms, that would be the él, ella, usted form, and then on the plural, ellos, ellas, ustedes form. The next thing you need to know about IR verbs is that when they stem change, the only two stem changes they do are O to U or E to I. Let's look at a couple of IR verbs that stem change. Okay, the verb dormir, you're used to seeing that as an O to UE verb in the present tense. Preferir, you're used to seeing as an E to IE verb in the present tense. And then servir, you're used to that one being E to I. So that one's not going to be too different for you. If you look at the first person forms, so that would be the yo and nosotros forms, you'll notice there's no stem change. They just follow the regular IR verb pattern in the preterite tense. Second form second person forms are the same. So the tú and vosotros forms, no stem change. When you get to the third person singular and plural forms, this is where we see the stem change. So to say he slept, we would say él durmió. They slept, ellos durmieron. To say she preferred, we would say ella prefirió. Ella prefirió. I was putting the accent on the wrong sound for that. To say they preferred, ellas prefirieron. And then for the verb to serve, if I wanted to say you served, and I'm talking to usted sirvió. And if I wanted to say you guys served, ustedes sirvieron. The last thing I want to show you are a couple of phrases and words that are commonly used in the preterite tense. So you'll need to become familiar with these and be prepared to use them in your assignment.